We can find slope using a grid, or we can find slope using a formula. This formula will come in handy when you don't have a grid available to you, or when the numbers within your ordered pairs are big enough that you don't want to have to plot it on a grid. The formula for finding a slope is m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And sometimes when people look at that formula at first, they get a little bit confused because it looks like those might be exponents. In fact, those are subscripts, and all they're doing is helping us to know whether the coordinates that we're dealing with are coming from the first point, point 1, or the second point, point 2. So in point 1, we have x1, y1, and in point 2, we have x2, y2. This helps us to ensure that we're substituting those values into the correct location of our slope formula. Keep in mind that finding y2 minus y1 is taking the difference between the vertical coordinates in your points. This is like finding the rise. And when we do x2 minus x1, we're finding the difference between the horizontal values within our coordinates, which is the same thing as finding the run. So we're still, in fact, doing rise over run. We're just doing it through algebra instead of counting on a grid. So in our first example, we will always begin with writing out our formula. So m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. We'll label our points as well. So point 1 will be labeled x1, y1, and point 2 will be labeled x2, y2. Now, if you did these in the opposite order and you called point 2, point 1, and point 1, point 2, you'd still get the same answer. So not to worry if you mixed up the way that you were going to label the ordered pairs, it would still work. In the way that we have them labeled now, we'll sub in 7 for our y2, and we'll sub in 5 for our y1. In the denominator, we'll sub in 3 for our x2 and 1 for our x1. Now we can simplify. In the numerator, 7 take away 5 will give us 2. And then in the denominator, 3 minus 1 will give us 2 again. This means that we have 2 over 2, which is the same thing as 1. So we have an m value between these 2 points of 1. In our second example, once again, we'll write out the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1 for the m value or the slope. And again, we'll label our points. So the first point will be x1, y1, and the second point will be x2, y2. As we sub those values into our formula, we'll have 8 going in for y2, and from that we'll subtract our y1 value, which is negative 4. You'll note that this is made two signs beside each other, but we know what to do when we have double signs. We'll simplify those double signs using our multiplication rules. A negative times a negative will give us a positive. In the denominator, we'll have x2 minus x1, which will be 6 minus 2. So our numerator leaves us with 8 plus 4, and our denominator is 6 minus 2, which is 4. As we simplify that numerator, we'll have 12 over 4. And 12 divided by 4 is 3. So our slope in this case will be m equals 3.